Hello everyone and good evening. My name's Don Arleth and you're watching our main edition of World News Tonight here on TVP World. Our main focus tonight is Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to Poland and Ukraine. This will be the first visit in 45 years by an Indian Prime Minister to Poland, and of course Modi's first visit to Ukraine since Russia launched its full-scale invasion back in 2022. We'll dig into the details later in the program, but first up, let's take a look at tonight's headlines. Chancellor Olaf Scholz insists that Germany will maintain support for Ukraine. Brussels demands an explanation from Hungary about Budapest easing its visa scheme for Russians. Lithuania has begun the construction of a base for German troops near its border with Russia. Moscow has claimed that Ukrainian forces have targeted a third bridge on the same river in the Kursk region. The Ukrainians are now in the second week of an operation that Kiev says is intended to create a buffer zone inside of Russia. Our Ukraine correspondent Oz Chatterjee now joins us live from Kyiv with the latest. Good evening, Oz. So what are the latest developments there on the ground?
Good evening. Yeah, the reports are coming in that Ukraine has targeted this third bridge, which would effectively cut off any Russian forces south of the Siem River, which could number quite a few hundred at least. With Zelensky saying again today that, in the words he used, replenished their exchange fund, which is him saying that they had more prisoners of war captured in the territory. Now it's a story of things happening in separate places that are bad news for Ukraine as well. We've had 4 civilians killed in the Donetsk Oblast today, with news that Russians are still advancing towards Pokrovsk, with residents of Pokrovsk now being given 2 weeks to evacuate their homes. So while Ukraine is making steady and strong gains in the Kursk region, particularly almost cutting off and encircling some Russians in the Glushkovsky district, but at the same time, they are losing ground still in Donetsk. And if the objective was to halt Russian advances in Donetsk by distracting them in Kursk, that's not having the desired impact. However, last night in Zelensky's address, he talked about creating a buffer zone on the aggressor's territory, and also talked about destroying as much Russian war potential as possible. So if you're judging the Ukrainian aims by what's happening in Donetsk, it's not going necessarily to plan. If you're judging them by what Ukraine in Kyiv are saying is the objective, they are creating a substantial zone inside Russian territory that the Ukrainians now occupy.
Oz Chatterjee reporting there from Kiev for us. Oz, thank you very much for your report. The German government has denied allegations that it wanted to stop sending aid to Ukraine while funding for this and next year is secured. From 2026 onwards, it could be offset by tapping into interest generated from frozen Russian assets.
Following speculations about Germany's withdrawal from aiding Ukraine, Deputy Government Spokesperson Wolfgang Büchner emphasized that Germany remained fully engaged in assisting Kyiv.
Germany remains fully committed to helping Ukraine, and the Chancellor's promise that support for Ukraine will continue as long as necessary still stands. No one, especially the Russian president, should count on us backing down.
The German government says it plans to contribute to a $50 billion aid package for Ukraine, agreed upon by G7 leaders back in June, with the funding possibly sourced from frozen Russian assets. The German budget for this year allocates 7.5 billion euros for Ukraine, with 4 billion euros marked for 2025. Additionally, Germany will provide Ukraine with military equipment, including air defense systems, tanks, and drones, while training 10,000 Ukrainian soldiers on its soil.
Germany has since become the greatest military supporter of Ukraine in Europe. The reasons for this the German government has made clear in public in the last years. That's also why I expect that Germany will remain a supporter of Ukraine.
But despite these commitments, tensions have arisen following an article by the German newspaper Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, which quoted Finance Minister Christian Lindner as advising against new financial commitments over the budget. This stance has faced criticism from both opposition and coalition members.
Time's up. Hungary's deadline to respond to the EU's request for information about expanding their work permit program expired today. The European Commission asked Hungary for clarification as the program potentially offers Russians and Belarusians easy access to other EU member states.
Hungary's new scheme facilitates Russians and Belarusians to gain work permits. Holders of such permits can enter other EU countries unimpeded. Budapest claims that workers are needed for expanding the Pax nuclear power plant. The new facility is being built by the Russian company Rosatom.
However, various Nordic and Baltic member states have expressed concern that Hungary is willingly opening the gates for Russian operatives to gain easy access to the entire Schengen area instead.
Effectively, through its actions, Hungary is doing everything it can to benefit Russia, trying to destabilize the situation in the EU.
At the moment of preparing this report, it is unclear whether Hungary has submitted any clarification or what its contents are. The Hungarian government has vehemently denied the allegations.
Unfortunately, our Northern European and Baltic colleagues continue their campaign of lies against Hungary. Any claims to the contrary are outright lies from the Northern European and Baltic colleagues, blinded by their pro-war stance.
It is, or it will boil down to the question who the individuals are that Hungary wants to allow to enter. And for that reason, the other Schengen member states and the Commission need to know exactly the names of those individuals that will get to enter through the new scheme.
Various politicians have already suggested to exclude Hungary from the Schengen area. Completely removing the country from Schengen is politically impossible due to Hungary's veto power. Still, a majority of member states could reintroduce a series of temporal border controls with Hungary. Others, such as German President Frank-Walter Steinmeier earlier today, are urging Hungary to remain in the European fold.
Hungary has been a member of the European Union since 2004. More than 83% of the people here voted to join the EU. And also, 20 years later, almost as many Hungarians say they feel that they are the citizens of the European Union.
Still, a majority of member states could reintroduce a series of temporal border controls with Hungary.
It will be interesting to see whether states like France, Germany, Italy will align with that position as well. Because if that's happening, then I think it's quite realistic that the member states will collectively or concertedly reintroduce border controls. And the same, of course, goes for Poland as well.
But Brussels has a mixed track record on its dealings with Hungary. It is unclear whether Budapest's actions will meet with consequences or not.
Vladimir Putin is paying an official visit to Baku, where he discussed the settlement of the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan with President Ilham Aliyev. The two latter countries are trying to normalize their ties despite sporadic clashes. Of course, the two leaders also talked about cooperation in energy security.
Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev is hosting Vladimir Putin for talks focusing on the normalization of ties between Baku and Yerevan. Since last autumn, when Azerbaijan captured the disputed territory of Nagorno-Karabakh, the two countries have been attempting to establish a permanent settlement of outstanding issues. Minor border skirmishes are still taking place between Armenian and Azerbaijani forces.
After September last year, a completely new situation emerged in the region. Azerbaijan has fully restored its sovereignty and territorial integrity. And of course, the new situation opens new opportunities for the establishment of lasting and long-term peace in the South Caucasus. And the stability and security of the entire South Caucasus region largely depends on close cooperation between Russia and Azerbaijan.
For much of the past 3 decades, the territory of Karabakh was controlled by a breakaway state allied with Armenia. Having a smaller economy and a smaller population, Armenia relied on its alliance with Russia to keep Azerbaijan at bay. However, when Baku moved to recapture Karabakh in 2023, breaking the Moscow-brokered ceasefire, Russian peacekeepers stationed in the region failed to respond. This has led to Yerevan to distance itself from Moscow and seek closer ties with Western countries.
In recent years, the attacks carried out by Azerbaijan against the Republic of Armenia have shown that the external security systems in which they are involved are not effective from the point of view of the state interests and security of Armenia.
While Azerbaijan maintains closer ties with Moscow than Armenia does, Baku has developed its relations with the West as well. In response to Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Brussels has reduced its reliance on Russian fossil fuels, seeking supplies from other sources. Azerbaijan has to provide the bloc with much-needed natural gas. Russian influence in both Yerevan and Baku has since diminished significantly.
The construction of Germany's largest military base on foreign soil broke ground today. Lithuania will host nearly 5,000 German troops that will be deployed to the new base by 2027.
Lithuania, on NATO's eastern flank. This is where a German battalion will soon be stationed.
Our goal is not to threaten or intimidate. We do not glorify force as our opponents do. But we are sure, when there is a need, we will not lack either the will or the strength, so that anyone who wants to test our strength will lose the desire to do so.
The first German troops will move in by the end of the year, and the brigade will reach full operational capability in just 3 years. Rudnika is expected to host 4,800 German servicemen.
It is one of the most paramount endeavors that the German armed forces are currently undertaking. It brings the German Zeitenwende into life.
Germany shifted its foreign policy after February of 2022. The country complies with NATO's defense spending 2% threshold. Berlin is the largest European net contributor to Ukraine.
This marks a change in NATO's planning process. Now we have to come to deterrence through denial, having enough forces so that the enemy does not even think of stepping on the territory of Lithuania with its dirty boots.
Lithuanian member of the European Parliament, Petras Austrevicius, tells me that the decision to host German troops was not an easy one.
Historically, it's a rather sensitive decision, politically as well. I mean, first time after World War II, the German militaries will be located outside Germany at such a big scale as military brigade. And I have to admit that that brigade is not a kind of average brigade.
It will be made up of 3 existing units, 2 armored battalions and a NATO enhanced forward presence battle group. The construction of the Rudnika training ground will cost Berlin and Vilnius 125 million euros.
Bulgaria's new anti-LGBT law has come into force. It bans any kind of educational program teaching non-traditional sexual orientation in schools. Activists say that the law will have a chilling effect on society, muzzling those who wish to speak out on LGBT issues.
The hopes of the LGBT community faded last week after Bulgarian President Rumen Radev signed into law a bill proposed by the far right.
It's very similar to the law in Russia. We call it the Putin's anti-LGBT plus propaganda, which unfortunately concerns Bulgaria right now, as similar to Hungary.
The law banning the promotion of ideas and views related to non-traditional sexual orientations was passed by Parliament in July. This is how the authors of the legislation argued its necessity.
It is anti-human to promote non-traditional sex education in schools. It is an anti-human ideology. And with this little text in the law, we will bury and stop this ideology before it begins.
The Bulgarian president ignored calls from the Council of Europe and civil society activists to veto the legislation.
This law was amended very close to the elections process. So we can see how the LGBT plus community is once again hijacked and scapegoated in the political interests of some parties.
Although proposed by the far right, the bill was supported by pro-European parties as well. Last year's Eurobarometer found that 3 in 4 Bulgarians thought same-sex marriage should not be allowed throughout Europe.
Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi is set to visit Poland and Ukraine later this week. Modi's visit will come on the 70th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between Poland and India.
The Polish press agency reports that the Indian Prime Minister will arrive in Poland on Wednesday. Modi's visit to Warsaw will be the first visit of an Indian PM in 45 years. He will reportedly travel to Kyiv on Friday, visiting Ukraine for the first time since the beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion. Modi has been calling for a ceasefire since the start of the war, but has, however, never outright condemned the invasion.
Since the beginning of the Ukrainian conflict, India said very clearly that this issue can only be solved through dialogue and diplomacy, and India is ready to contribute to any peace process.
Modi's visit to Kyiv comes just weeks after his widely criticized trip to Russia. During his stay in Moscow, Modi and Putin were seen hugging, chatting over tea, riding in an electric vehicle and watching a horse show. At the same time, Russian missiles had struck a children's hospital in Kyiv.
Yesterday you invited me to your residence, and like a true friend, we spent 4 to 5 hours together.
While Western countries have imposed sanctions on Moscow, India continues to trade with Russia, providing a much-needed lifeline for Kremlin's strained war chest. New Delhi remains reliant on Russian military equipment and has ramped up purchases of discounted Russian crude oil since the start of the war.
India is a strategic partner with whom we engage in a full and frank dialogue, and that includes on our concerns about the relationship with Russia.
New Delhi is seeking to both deepen its relationship with the West and simultaneously avoid straining its relationship with Moscow.
As a friend, I have always said that for the bright future of our coming generations, peace is of utmost importance. But I also know that solutions are not possible on battlegrounds. Amid bombs, guns and bullets, solutions and peace talks do not succeed. We will have to follow the path of peace only through talks.
Modi has been in power for more than a decade, overseeing the swift growth of India's economy and significantly improving India's standing in the world. His vast welfare program, which serves around 60% of the population, lifted hundreds of millions out of food poverty. However, critics view Modi as a cold leader who has eroded India's democracy, clamped down on independent media and quashed dissent, as well as advanced Hindu nationalism.
As we prepare for India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi to visit Warsaw and then Kyiv later this week, now it's time to unpack some of the issues that might be discussed. Joining me now to highlight these issues is Patryk Kugiel, Asia-Pacific analyst at the Polish Institute of International Affairs, joining me here in the studio. Thank you for joining us. Hello.
Thank you for having me.
And Velina Chkarova, founder of geopolitical consultancy FACE, who's joining us remotely online. Hello, and thank you for joining us on World News Tonight.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
Yes. Now, looking at the significance of Prime Minister Modi's visit to Poland, then later on to Kyiv, and of course we can't forget that the war continues to rage there, and India has been kind of a silent member of the international community for the most part concerning this conflict. When Modi comes to Warsaw, and let's start off with you first, Patryk. Do you believe that a lot of these discussions with the Prime Minister will revolve around Ukraine?
Certainly. This visit to Poland happened mainly because Prime Minister Modi wanted to go to Kiev, to Ukraine, to balance its unfortunate visit to Moscow last month. So we are happy, or we benefit from India's interest in Ukrainian affairs at the moment, because we were waiting and we were trying to invite Indian Prime Minister to Poland for the last 45 years. So we already benefited from this international context. So this is a priority for Polish government, and certainly this will stand high on the agenda of bilateral talks. But I am skeptical whether we can influence Prime Minister Modi or make it to change its mind, its position on the war in Ukraine. But it is nevertheless very important to understand each other's position better, to understand the constraints and limitations of each other, or the perspective that each country has on this conflict. So when it comes to Ukraine, I think we'll hear more of the same from what we already have heard from India in the last 2.5 years. It means that India is not a silent spectator of the war in Ukraine, but it consistently stands on the position that the end of the conflict, of the war, must be found at the negotiating table through dialogue and diplomacy, and not on the battlefield. Until now, this position served more to the interest of Russia, which was an aggressor, but the situation in Ukraine on the battlefield is changing fast, and probably one day Ukraine will be more willing to have kind of peace talks with Russia, and then possibly India can pop in and play a very constructive role in bringing to the negotiating table both sides, because India is a rare country that has good relations with both the West and Russia, the Ukraine and Russia, and it can breach these many contradictions and opposing sides to this conflict.
Now, Velina, in your opinion, why now? Why is this a good time for Prime Minister Modi to come here to Poland and then on to Kyiv? What is he going to be looking to accomplish?
Well, let's start first with the inauguration of Prime Minister Modi. He is now in his Modi 3.0 government, and he feels, so to say, now more or less eligible to start deepening the relationships, as actually was already outlined, with both blocs. So obviously on the one hand with Russia, this was the first official trip, which immediately followed by a trip to Austria. As we know, and me being also based in Austria, I cannot stop highlighting how actually Austria is also being perceived with its, let's say, Russian-friendly policies, which from India's point of view is interesting case. And now we have the second lack of this kind of European trips, with obviously the counter, let's say, narrative, and the counter narrative could not be more, let's say, communicated in a better way, and could not be more transparent if not from Kiev personally, and then obviously also from Warsaw, which is the strongest supporter, has been the strongest supporter, and will remain the strongest supporter of Ukraine.
I'm sure it seems like one of the elephants in the room is definitely the oil supply that, India is a big purchaser of Russian oil. Do you think that subject's going to come up here in Warsaw, maybe in Kyiv? There's going to be some attempt to try and get India to rethink this policy?
I strongly doubt that it will stand on the agenda for many reasons. First of all, India's purchases of Russian oil is ongoing with consent and approval from the United States. This is done by purpose to redirect the Russian oil and not to take it out from the international market, because otherwise we would expect high fuel prices across the world that would negatively affect us in Europe, but also many people in the developing world. So I think this is somehow an incalculated price of the current situation. And whenever Western leader tried to raise this issue at front of the Indian diplomats, it was he or she was met with a very staunch resistance and refutal of the arguments put forward by the Western side. So I think we have already put it behind us. We will look more into the future what role can India play when it comes to the end of the war in Ukraine. We will probably discuss more about the reconstruction of Ukraine. Hopefully one day it will start, and probably then India might be interested in being involved in reconstruction of Ukraine, in being a stakeholder of the peace and guarantor of the peace deal whenever it will arise. So I think the Russian oil will not be any point of friction this time, neither in Warsaw nor in Kiev.
Valina, I'd like to sort of pose the same question to you and also ask about the potential for Poland to effectively take on the role as a bridge builder. It has lobbied in the past for Kiev very staunchly and continues to do so day in and day out.
Well, the only geopolitical bridge builder right now is actually India. India is the only state actor that has the geoeconomic portfolio, the military power exposure, not just in the region, but beyond. It's actually the only state actor that has been involved in military conflict and tensions with China as well. And obviously has the demographics. So it's it has a very bullish prognosis in general for the next at least a decade or even longer. I just don't see any bridge builders in Europe, to be honest with you. But what I see as a very important role on behalf of Poland is that Poland, contrary to some Western European countries right now, is having this really positive economic outlook. And Poland is also becoming a kind of front runner in terms of the emerging new, Iron Curtain 2.0, emerging new Cold War 2.0 between China and United States, and it's being played out in Europe as we all see. There is no disagreement whatsoever. So here I see more incentives on behalf of India to really reach out to Poland and see where are the possibilities for the geoeconomic expansion of the relationship. Keyword for you is the IMEC, but also the TRISIS initiative. These are two important regional initiatives. And beyond that, defense, security, these are obviously very important fields. Regional governance, here I don't have many good news for you, because in reality, India, I think, will be also pushing for the Russian narrative to some extent, and that is the narrative that Russia has to be a part of the negotiation process. What I expect for this year is actually alternative peace process coming from BRICS, including with, obviously, with Indian participation. Brazil and China already promoted that. But what's, still positive, still optimistic, let's put it that way, is that India is interested in participating in the Ukraine-initiated peace process. And here I see a lot of points of intersection, specifically when it comes to food security, the nuclear talks. Think of the possibility of nuclear catastrophe. Think also of the energy infrastructure and so on and so forth. So there are points of intersection.
Right now, Kyiv's most likely going to be pushing, following up on this, for their point of view concerning peace talks, which could take place as early as November, depending on the outcome of the U.S. elections or not. So, in that guise, do you think that Narendra Modi is going to listen to what Kyiv has to say about initiating talks with Russia? Will it help in some ways?
India's position is clear. It wants a negotiated settlement of the problem, but the solution that is acceptable to both sides. So it will not push for Ukraine peace plan only, or it will not present Vladimir Putin's Russia's position on the final solution of the war, but it will try to bring both sides to the table, and it can play a role of messenger, yeah, passing the message from one side to the other. But India can be an honest broker, yeah, because it has these good relations with both sides. It will not be possibly the kind of solution that, of the peace plan that we would like to see in Europe, yeah? in Poland especially, because we would love India to play a slightly different role in ending this conflict. India could have used its good relationship with Vladimir Putin, with Russia, to encourage Russia to withdraw from Ukraine, to observe the international law. India hasn't done it for its own national interests. And I think we have no power, except maybe for the United States, which needs India for a different reason, which is named China. So we have no power to change, to influence, to change India's position on this war. India will try to find a solution that is acceptable to both sides, which means, from our perspective, that it is peace deal, not very favorable to Ukraine. But possibly, depending on the situation on the battlefield, one day we will need to start talking about such an not the ideal solution. And then India can step in and play a role, a positive role in this conflict. But we can't change India's position because it is rooted and it's grounded on the international, national interest of India and its people.
Valina, do you think that India could play a much more favorable role in ending this conflict, or a more positive role than that of China? Because China seems to be kind of out of the picture for Ukraine. Final question, very briefly.
Yes, it's certainly very positive that Prime Minister Modi is traveling to Kiev. The signal he sends with this trip is immensely important from Ukraine's point of view, because Zelensky and his team, they will all have the chance to present the original Ukrainian version of what's going on the ground, and what are the next, steps, and then, the next phases of the development. And I think that this is what Prime Minister Modi wants to understand: how long this war is going to last, what repercussions. Think of the global South, where India is increasingly playing an important role as an advocate of 7 billion people, and the food crisis, the energy crisis, all of these ripple effects that are having on global trade and economy are things that really are now actually resulting in a lot of political turmoil. So I think this is the most important part. But I do not expect any active mediator role on behalf of India, because there is no real incentive right now to really invest a lot of political capital in such actions. And I think the strategic ambiguity and taking the best from both worlds, meaning from the West on the one hand and from this Russia-China relationship, from the Dragon Bear and by extension from the BRICS, is what India is going to pursue in the short term.
Valina Chakharova, founder of geopolitical consultancy FACE, joining us remotely. Thank you very much for your insight. We appreciate it. And Patryk Kugiel, Asia-Pacific analyst at the Polish Institute for International Affairs. Thank you very much for being in the studio today.
Thank you.
And that concludes this edition of World News Tonight. Thank you all for watching, and stay with us for more here on TVP World.